Hello, 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 Dosto. You are back listening to another episode of Red, White, and Brown from Live.
And we're missing Michael today. And Michael was actually driving. He drove all the way from California, all the way to Missouri. And he was texting on the way. He was telling us about how things were. And he's still driving, but he got to a hot spot and said hi. And he said he's missing us, but we'll definitely see him next week. Though, if of course, in Missouri, he won't get to see the theater movies, but he'll definitely get to see whatever comes on screen. So we look forward to having Michael back with us next week. But he was with me this week when we went to the theaters. However, we got two series and a movie that we review this week. We're gonna review 9 Hours that is streaming on Hotstar. We're also gonna review another series called Ashram Season 3. We have reviewed Season 1 and 2 before, and guys, the review is on our website. You can go check it out. And we will review the movie Major. And here we are. Shreya, you want to get started?
Absolutely. I want to take it away with 9 hours because even before I watched this movie, I thought it was incredibly exciting. 9 hours is exactly what you think it is. I don't know what you think it is, but what I thought it was three inmates, and they're actually in prison, but they have something called a roll call where they get checked in. And I want to say like prison heads or prison guards or management is like, is everybody here that's supposed to be here? So they have a roll call, but then before their next roll call, they have 9 hours. So what do you think prison inmates are going to do in their 9 hours? You know, they're probably sleeping in their bunks, following orders, showering, sitting in the courtyard or the yard, as they call it. Not these prisoners, though. These three actually have a challenge where they decide to rob three big banks in 9 hours. So they have 9 hours before they have to be back for next roll call. So no, they're not busting out and leaving. They're busting out, robbing more banks, and coming back to the prison because that's where they think, one, they're going to end up anyway, and two, because they think it's the safest place to be after robberies. So crazy enough, in these 9 hours, their goal is to go ahead, hit their targets, and then come back and pretend as if nothing has happened. Now, things do happen. They unfortunately are just hit with so many twists and turns, and everything turns for the worse when the police start to get involved because somebody starts tipping them off about the robberies. So do they make it back in time? Do they not? You will find out. What did you think about it, Em?
I thought actually the premise was very interesting, but then I figured out that it is actually an adaptation of a Telugu novel called Tomidi Gantalu, which means 9 hours, and it's written by Maladi Venkata Krishnamurti. It's set in the mid-90s, by the way, and the filmmaker Krish Jagaralamudi actually adapted it from this novel. So that was very interesting for me as a starting premise, and it is directed by Niranjan Kaushik and Jacob Verghese, so two directors. So obviously, I thought there'll be a difference in treatment while the episodes unraveled. There are 9 episodes, guys, and they're long and tediously long. And then, of course, one thing that we keep telling Indian makers, there are backstories upon backstories, upon backstories, upon backstories. And at times, there's so many backstories that you get lost in that entire maze of backstories and stories upon stories. So the narrative has a lot to unravel, and the backstories of the characters sometimes also turn into commentary. And sometimes it's about relationship dynamics, sometimes it's about gender, sometimes about greed or power games. So sometimes you feel you're actually attending a moral science lecture in between of that entire series. But yeah, I thought even though it was long drawn out, some of the actors were really good. It was Taraka Ratna, there's Ajay, Madhu Shalini. I think the music was okay. It was pretty okay drawn out. And of course, guys, before we lose the track and forget to tell you, it is streaming on Hulu on the Hotstar hub. From the perspective of the storyline, there is a short-tempered cop who is near one of the banks and wants to save the hostages. His estranged wife is a reporter, and the bank manager who's serving his last day at work before retirement is there's a romance between that person, his assistant, and another guy at the bank. And then there is this entire convoluted story that's happening at the bank, but at the prison, there's this politics happening. So there's so many characters that at times I felt it was really difficult to keep track of their stories and their backstories and their motivations. And then there's some very cheesy portions like the egoistic movie star, and then there's the other wannabe actor who wants to get the better of him, and then it's just a lot of content. But also between the backstories and how the story progresses, it just takes its own sweet time to unravel. And the deliberate slow pace really got to me, because even though they had 9 hours to get back to the prison, the entire series did not show any sense of urgency, which I missed quite a lot.
I completely agree with everything Em has said, y'all. And we just got finished with Mira's review of 9 Hours, which, as we all know, is adapted from the Telugu novel Tomidi Gantalu, which, crazy enough, I didn't know until she just said it. So I guess we learn something new every day. But I am ready to tell you guys exactly what I thought of it. There is a part within this whole 9 hour shenanigan where it turns into kind of this like hostage like situation. And you are, because they're being held captive, we start seeing secrets. And, you know, once you know secrets, you start learning some backstories. And then once you start hearing backstories, you hear more backstories. And that's what I felt like this whole thing, it was longer than it needed to be, because we kept hearing backstory after backstory after backstory. We kept getting introduced to more characters within more backstories. And all of a sudden you start to get confused. You no longer know what each character's main motivation is, which at the end of the day, it should just be pretty simple. They just want to get back into jail after they've committed 3 robberies, which, by the way, they're robbing 3 branches of the same bank, which I kind of thought was dumb starting off, because I'm like, that's the easiest way to get tipped off if you're robbing the same bank multiple times, or the same type of bank multiple times. I'm like, you're definitely going to tip off the Fed somewhere. So that already was like a shaky start to the story. But once you start getting into the rest of this, I'm like, we're introduced to tons of characters. It does start getting confusing. And I'm like, at some point you lose engagement. You do lose engagement from the audience. You know, you never keep the action going. It just keeps getting cut by the concept of why these characters are doing what they're doing. And then every time you take the audience out of the moment, especially because they try so hard to make it as action-packed as possible, but then you cut it short and you take the audience out of the moment, it takes a second to get back into it once we're done with whatever flashback is happening. So I'm like, if you do it enough times, people will just eventually stop watching because you lose the flow. And I kind of wondered why the director didn't think about flow when the story was being made. Like, maybe it was written differently and was directed differently, but I feel like that's something that the director normally pays attention to. Like, typically they're number one when it comes to what is going to keep the audience engaged for the longest time. And I'm like, I don't really think you need this to be a whole series, because it's just so drawn out. I don't even think they had enough episodes to make it a solid series. So they just keep adding more and more content, and it just feels tacked on.
I completely agree with you over there. You know, I had a problem with Hawkeye earlier because it was such a linear story, and I kept telling you, why did they make such a linear story? They should have started somewhere else and then told the story from a perspective, and they didn't do that. Over here, they start somewhere, but then between all the characters and their backstories and the moral science lectures in between, you know, it becomes a documentary in the middle of it all. Like, you could almost fall asleep, because it becomes like a discourse on certain things in life, and you're like, damn, what happened to the heist? Mm-hmm. Please make sure you rob the bank before I go off to sleep. Like, literally.
Something else you might enjoy is what we liked from 9 Hours. I want to personally say that some characters, some actors were just phenomenal. Taraka Ratna as Officer Pratap blew me away. I thought he was phenomenal, especially when they were holding the bankers and like the customers hostage in the hostage situation. He did such a phenomenal job with his emotional outburst that I was like, it was just so good. All the actors ended up becoming people that we just didn't expect. Like, there were the backstory. There was like a love story involved. Somebody was like a widower. There was like someone who was like her harasser. There was just so much happening with the backstories, but it just goes to show that how no matter a character is portrayed, like you'll never truly know what their motivation is sometimes. And there is that dimension to just knowing too much about the characters, at least to understand why they're so dynamic. And I did like that part. Hats off to, personally, I thought the Ratna was like the number one in my mind, but I give it to Ravi Verma. I give it to Ajay. I even give it to Vinod Kumar. They were all great. I loved it. Have no complaints about the acting in this show at all.
I have complaints about the editing. They could have trimmed the show by a lot of inches all over. They could really made it shorter and sharper, and it would have been a really riveting watch. And that's my 2 cents.
You are right, Em. However, we did give this show an 8 out of 10 on Desis.live. So if you haven't read the review yet, what are you doing? You should go read it, Desis.live. And while you're at it, you should follow us on Instagram and Twitter. That is at Desis Livegram or at Desis Live on Twitter.